that I think we should be talking about, and that is the story of the roots of the notwithstanding clause, also known as the overriding clause. And the roots are actually not Canadian, but rather American. The roots of the notwithstanding clause are actually in the United States, and I don't have time to get into that because I decided not to talk about that, but it was discussed in the conference of the Israeli Historical Association or Organization, where we talked about the lessons that could be learned from this untold story about giving state and Congress the ability to act notwithstanding a judicial invalidation of a statute. Just to summarize that, we could think of ways to craft or design a notwithstanding clause in Israel in a manner that would take most of the sting out of this design, but of course it has to be done in a collaborative and deliberative manner and not like the proposals that are currently being discussed. So, closing the brackets, this is what I will not be talking about. What I will be talking about at the request of Rivi is something completely different. And I will be talking about the virtual domain, its normative implications, and some thoughts about what to do next. So, when you look at the virtual domain, the question that arises is how to think about this virtual domain. Is this just another context where we live, or is it or is it indeed a fifth dimension? What do we mean by dimension? In law, usually we have 4 criteria to establish what we call a legal dimension. These are the criteria of jurisdiction. So we have space. Any legal norm applies in a concrete space. Any legal norm applies in a definite period of time. You can't talk about law in an atemporal manner, a concrete law, not total law, but a concrete legal arrangement. Any legal norm has to capture actors, and any legal norm has to say something about the function, what you do or do not do, what the state is authorized or not authorized. We call it jurisdiction in ratio materia. And as I said, the question is how to think about the virtual. Is the virtual simply another context in which we talk about those 4 criteria, or is it a fifth dimension in the sense of those criteria? There is another extension here that we should consider seriously as an analytical and also sociological component that is not just, okay, just another context. So what's unique about the virtual? The first is that it's a different kind of space. The starting point is actually my kids. So when I tell my kids, your time is up, put the iPad / iPhone / tablets or whatever, put it down, enough. They look at me as if I told them, kindly remove your arm, or kindly disregard the color purple, or stop. Like it's a part of the reality. They live there. It's an extension of their self.
You should give them for adoption.
Exactly. But if I give them for adoption, it'll be through a virtual website where you give people adoption. So they live there. They connect there. They build their identity. They form their moral values. They contest. They deliberate. They sing, dance, whatever. They're there. From their perspective, they don't understand me. As they say, you are from a different generation. You don't get it. It's like life is different than your experience of it. Okay, so I can simply tell them, oh, context has changed, or I can seriously examine the possibility that there's actually another dimension of the social condition itself, and within it, the human condition has extended. And so let's look at this space more analytically. So the relationship of this dimension to space is complex. Of course, there are servers, and there are wires and there are bytes. It is tangible, but the construction that is generated through technology is non-tangible. It's a construction. And of course, the more we get into the meta world, the putting on those glasses, or whatever, the devices, and you live there, and you buy there, and you interact there with others, with haptics or without haptics, the more challenging it becomes. Now, not only is it a complex relationship between the physical and the virtual, because the virtual, of course, has a physical dimension, but beyond that, it creates different type of divides. Jurisdiction looks very, very different on the in the virtual. State boundaries, you know, if you're, my kids, they don't care if they're discussing something with a Swedish person, a Persian person. It's online, that's what matters. So the divides are different, but also the virtual is split differently between urban centers and rural centers, between the north and the south. There's a digital divide. It's a different type of divide that it's generated. Time works differently. The idea of the viral is new. And again, this relates to the relationship between technologies and revolutions. I don't think we can think about the Civil War without understanding the technologies that became available then. But now, we all know what viral is. It's an immediate distribution of a certain idea between many to many. And again, I don't have time to get into that, but if you want to talk about it, there's a lot of literature and communication theories about what it means. So, in the one sense, it's immediate. In another sense, it's eternal in the sense that the dimension never forgets. Now, this is actually not accurate. Why? Because it never forgets so long as you have the right technology. We are now at risk that some things will be forgotten forever if we lose the right technology. Librarians worry, because if you have a book and you preserve it, it lasts thousands of years, actually, if you preserve it well enough. But the new technology, it can become inaccessible if you lose the technology, and then things will be lost forever. And another idea is that, I don't know how many of you tried the GPT, whatever it's called, the chat.
I did.
You did, good. So you communicated with the chat. That's nice. And the chat answers questions. The question is, who is the author? If students, all kinds of ethical questions come out of it. But this is just now. This is a little kid starting to walk. Wait another 2, 3, 5 years when this little kid grows and becomes, whatever is not captured by Google or the chat will no longer exist. The memory will be lost. You can't access it. The virtual actors are, of course, completely different. The corporate elite, we talked about elites. Now the corporate elites become very relevant actors because they decide the law. Facts themselves are virtualized. What is a fact? Well, is the fact a certain number of bits or bytes or whatever that move from one place and that this is... How do we know the facts now? We run experiments. How do you know what happened online? You have to develop a very interesting type of forensics to know what exactly happened online, because it contains this physical dimension, but also the virtualization of the physical dimension. And of course, anybody who spent any time on Reddit know that there's a different language. Sexualized in weird ways, developed in order to evade certain type of censorship regimes that are going on, so they won't be captured by certain content moderation techniques. So language changes online. And then AI is there. Hello, AI. AI predicts. AI establishes a certain type of understanding of what it is, because through AI it tells us, the AI actually tells us what we actually see. A lot of literature on that. Of course, the state finds itself in a difficult position online, not only because of the jurisdictional limits I talked about before, but also because the state itself doesn't have a certain cybernetic tsar, and the cybernetic authority governs no, it doesn't work like that. Each agency finds itself represented online, and the state actually has 3 roles online. The state itself is a user. The state uses Word and Twitter and Facebook. So the state is a user. The state is a regulator, regulates this. But the state is also a super user, because the state itself can develop technologies that themselves are robust enough to govern this dimension. So the state itself is in a conflict of interest because it has to regulate itself as a super user, but also to protect itself as a user from, okay, you get it. So it's unclear also that the regulatory attitudes there are you can't just use command and control. Again, literature on regulatory attitudes is rich. You can't just use command and control. The question is, when do you co-regulate? When did you allow the corporations to develop standards and then self-regulate? And then let's talk about moving in this domain. How do you mobilize? Part of the rise of the democratic backsliding, this is why I congratulate really for putting us together. You can't really understand this backsliding without understanding what's going on the virtual. Because the money, the commercialization engine behind many of these platforms is the more engagement we get, the better. And how do you get engagement? By generating polarization. By getting people to be angry, by the echo chambering impact. Now, I'm not saying that it's the fault of technology. I'm saying that societal processes are there. I'm just saying technology is part of the ecosystem. You cannot understand it without technology. What is being retweeted and made viral and stuff like that generates polarization. And we should, again, that connects to the idea of why the Civil War happened when it happened, and why the First World War happened when it happened. You can't understand it without these type of technologies that became available and then used or misused for political reasons, including polarization. So illiberal tendencies are highly interlaced with this dimension, which of course raises a question of regulation. Let's talk about the normative. So the starting point is that we experience a crisis of legitimation, which then fuels to the idea of the rise of the illiberal. Because the illiberal says, I'm the true liberal, in the sense, I'm not the true liberal, but the true democratic, because I represent the people better than you liberal elites. Because there's a crisis of legitimation, and some of it is fueled by illiberal regimes on purpose, to sow distrust of the government. We know that. So the source of power now is in crisis because it's private power. The relationship between private power and public power is vexing. The liberal idea of liberty and equality, which we thought would dominate this virtual domain. We thought this virtual domain will be a place where we can express liberty and equality for all, unlike the physical domain where elites ruled us, etc. Unlike that, the technology itself allows for domination and control. Why? Through AI. People like you, oh, that's nice, so I can nudge people like you to behave in ways that you don't even realize that you were nudged into forming certain type of beliefs and behaving in a certain way. So the technology now, it's an unprecedented, to an unprecedented degree. Maybe the Catholic Church had it when you had to confess on your sins, so each priest knew exactly, and they could report on it, and then you had a degree of social control, maybe the Stasi, okay. But this is at a global level. You can now collect data on everybody and run AI and know how to manipulate, unbeknownst to the people who are manipulated that they were manipulated. So if we care about what Alon said, I should voice my so maybe you were just pushed to voice this and the other. You didn't generally think that you object to this particular law because it's a law. Maybe you were manipulated because you saw a certain song before or viewed a certain commercial, and then it made you angry, and then you decided, oh, I'm not going to abide by this law because these questions become in practice very difficult to examine if you take agency seriously. Now that brings me to agency. The question of what is sovereignty now. Sovereignty is a complex concept because sovereignty has this illiberal dimension in it. Because sovereignty is the ultimate power to say, that's it. The buck stops here. We have some sovereignty. Now, of course, it has liberal constraints coming from the outside or the inside, and it's based on human agency. Now, what is the human agency here? The relationship of human and machine is complex, and also various agencies, state agencies, maintaining sovereignty. And as we just said, the state agencies and their relationship to private power is contested now. So what do we do about it? We are developing what is called digital due process, so that's an addition to the 14th Amendment, Mark. That's due process. Now we have digital due process, so we should revise the 14th Amendment to include the 6th not just the fifth, the sixth clause of the 14th Amendment to talk about digital due process. And usually we do it by what is called part, the idea of participation, accountability, representation, and transparency. But these are nice slogans. When you want to break them down legally, they become very complex. And of course, because it's a virtual dimension, you have to think about regulation by design. How do we design? The technology just doesn't arise. It doesn't just emerge or fall from the sky. We design the technology. It's up to us. Talk about agency, right? It's up to us. So how are we integrating into the development of this virtual or sustaining this virtual dimension, ethical and legal consideration? How do we control the data? How do we ensure that people are data literate? How do we talk about the data flow and storage and fusion and analysis? And again, there's literature on each of those for those who are interested in the relationship between the digital and the constitutional. But it does boil down to the question of really complex compliance. The EU is wonderful on this. They devise all kinds of relatively complex regulatory regimes, the GDPR, the GDAI, the Data Governance Act, the NIS with respect to cyber attack, and I can go on to recite those European codificatory tools, and you have to comply with each and all, and then you have a question of complex compliance, which is great for some lawyers because they can make a lot of money out of it, and they come to study in our law school, so that's good for us. But, putting cynicism aside, it does raise an issue of governance. How to manage this notion of complex compliance. And this is, at the end of the day, there's a clash here between deliberation and contestation. We think that the liberal idea is we deliberate and exchange. But we do have to realize that within liberalism, there's also an idea of contestation, of saying, no, I don't agree. Again, it correlates with the Lawrence point. At a certain point, we say, no, I don't agree. And we need some contestation, not just deliberation. And how to contest the emerging private power is a challenge. And this is even before we talked about the quantum. The quantum, winter is upon, quantum is upon us. Once quantum is here in the next 10 to 15 years, that's going to add another layer of complexity. So this is just to say that between the late 19th century of Marx writings and the 21st century, there's actually a thread which connects, and that is technology. Thank you.